Now, let's talk about this double voting thing. One of the senators who was able to get this information out of the AEC and most likely is going to be able to work out exactly what is happening when it comes to the individual electorates is Senator James Paterson. We had a chance to talk to him a bit earlier today. Senator, good evening.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
So isn't there a person who's been watching our show or doesn't have a sense of the issues who is not shocked at the idea that almost 18,000 people may have voted more than once at this election, a couple of people voting 11 times, yet the AEC seems to be a little limited in the detail that they're handing over. What do you think of this?
Well, what happens straight after the election is the AEC goes and checks the electoral roll to see if any people have had multiple marks against their names. Now, multiple marks can happen for a range of reasons. Sometimes it is subsequently discovered it was just a clerical error on behalf of an AEC official. But other times what has happened is someone has gone and had their name marked off at multiple booths and received multiple ballot papers and presumably voted with those ballot papers, and sometimes they admit to doing it. So at the 2013 election, there were 18,000 suspected instances of multiple voting, and after it was further investigated, it was reduced down to about 7,000, and it was confirmed that 7,000 people had, for whatever reason, voted multiple times. Now, occasionally that can be innocent, but often it is not, and it is a serious problem.
Let's imagine the numbers are exactly the same as last time around, and it's only almost 8,000 that get handed over to the AFP. The AEC, however, have told us today that they can't give us the information about what seats all of this voting took place in. Now, I find it a little hard to square up that they can work out, firstly, that there was this many irregularities. Secondly, they can give us specificity of which states, but they're not willing to name what electorates. Now, that matters to me simply because in the seat of Herbert, and I don't know what happened in the seat of Herbert, that was decided by 37 votes.
That's right. And look, my colleague Dean Smith from Western Australia has followed this up a lot of times at Senate estimates, and sometimes he's had a bit of success in getting more detail. We have asked the AEC, and Dean asked the AEC on Tuesday night, to take on notice where these instances of multiple voting were. Now, the Senate has particular powers to seek information from government agencies, and the AEC is a government agency. So I think this is one to watch and wait. I'd be very disappointed and surprised if the AEC wasn't able to provide the Senate with more detail. They may not wish to provide it to a journalist, I'm sorry, Paul, but they may be expected to provide it to the Senate in the future.
Well, that's why we pay you, and we're very glad that you can chase it on our behalf. Finally on this, though, I do want to ask, though, in the history of our federation, as best as I can understand, nobody has actually been convicted of multiple voting. Now, this in part is because while the evidence may be that Paul Murray's name was marked off X number of times, there's no video evidence that I physically walked up and did it, physically collected the ballots, physically marked them out and physically put them in. Is this not a slight flaw in the system?
Unquestionably, Paul. So at the last election, after the AEC identified these 7,000 instances or thereabouts of multiple voting, they referred all of them to the AFP, and my understanding is that the AFP did not prosecute or refer anyone to the DPP for prosecutions, even though some of those people themselves admitted to have been engaged in multiple voting. Now, some of them, for example, were elderly people who voted once in a mobile voting booth in their retirement home, and then their kids might have taken them out to vote on a Saturday. So they're not really people we want to lock up, obviously. But others just admitted that they did it because they thought it was funny or a joke or a bit of a laugh. Now, if the AFP and if the government can't prosecute them, even when they admit to doing so, I think we do have a problem, and I think that's something that the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters should look at and make some recommendations about. Well,
there's also a fairly common sense thing here too about the electoral roll, which is pretty simple, is that we live in the era where technology could be available to, rather than walking up there and the little pencil being pushed from one side of the phone book to the other, that basically everyone could be electronically on the roll. You, the voter, slide a tab from one side to the other, and then you're officially taken off the roll.
Yeah, that's a reasonable idea, Paul. It was actually trialled at the 2014 Griffith by-election in some booths, and I understand that the AEC didn't wish to proceed with it because they thought rolling it out on a national scale would be very expensive and complex for what some people would regard and some people would say is a problem confined to a small number of people. Now, I think electoral integrity is a very important thing, and I'd like to see a full accounting of what those costs would be to see if it really is not achievable.
Senator James Paterson, we'll talk to him in the coming weeks, because hopefully we can actually get the information that the AEC clearly already knows. Where did the people get their names marked off more than once, and where did the people vote 11 times. Extraordinary. All right, let's have a chat about Gillian Triggs here, where, look, we know she's never going to resign, but can the government shove her out? Most likely they'll just wait around until, early next year when she's going to not be reappointed to the job. This is important because, as I said, so she gives an interview to a paper no one buys, no one's heard of, but it's a thing called the Saturday paper. And, they're very lefty and very pro her. Anyway, they put out a quote, and we showed you that quote before, and then she's turned around and said, oh, it's not true. They sort of added some words, the sub-editors fiddled with things. It turns out after the newspaper said, well, hang on, no, we just transcribed what you said. We actually have the tape. Then she's turned around and said to the Senate, oh, okay, sorry, I got it slightly wrong. And as my dear colleague Chris Kenny writes today in The Australian, it's not the first time this has happened. Once again, Gillian Triggs playing the Triggs game of the two-step. Have a look.
So you were quoted as saying in the interview that a shocking phenomenon is Australians don't even understand their own democratic system. They're quite content to have Parliament be complicit with passing legislation to strengthen the power of the executive and exclude the courts. They have no idea of the separation of powers and the excessive overreach of executive government. I assume you are correctly quoted in that?
I don't have access to the interview on which that edited piece was written.
Edited piece, as in they fiddled with my words. No, they didn't. They transcribed your quotes, and you tried to lie in front of the Parliament. Hence why there's some serious... She'll be recalled to give more evidence. There'll be more on Gillian Triggs, and we'll go on with this nonsense. The government should sack her. Again, James Paterson, the senator from Victoria, I asked him about it earlier today.
Has she misled the Senate? Did she do so knowingly? Was it deliberate? That's a key question that I think the committee should look at. And if she is unable to provide a good explanation, then I think she should seriously consider her position.
Now, Darren,